Hi, my name is Morgan Hammen, and I am the writer, director, and producer of The Bad Guy. And I'm here with Artie Gonzales.
Hey, hey, hey.
He is our script consultant and associate producer, and we're here today to talk about the project, The Bad Guy. It's a short film that I wrote, and I've been working on it for a couple of years. Artie here has been helping me the whole way. With development and making sure that we're bringing a voice of authenticity to it. And it's a beautiful story that talks about a man reentering the world after being incarcerated and the struggles that he faces. And all the while, he's being stalked by his surviving victims. Um,
Mhm.
so it's exciting. It's a thriller. It's a drama, and it touches on a lot of really, deep hidden topics that we'd love to explore today.
Absolutely. It has been my pleasure to be attached to this project, and I'm always so grateful to you for, inviting me in the first place. As soon as I read the script, I just knew it was authentic to start with. So
Thank
let's
you.
just start with that. Like a lot of times, what we see portrayed in media in terms of the experience of someone who is incarcerated or formerly incarcerated in my view, we often get that wrong in many ways.
hmm
It's often very stereotypical. It is often degrading,
hmm
or it minimizes the human condition or the human experience, and it minimizes us all the way down to animals,
Yeah.
thugs,
Truly.
gangsters.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times the way that media, movies, or music depicts people who are previously incarcerated, it shows a side of it where they're almost they're almost kind of seen to be like these wild dogs, whereas there's so much more depth to these people. I mean, they know what it is like to feel deep remorse and deep regret, and to feel that sort of pain of that strife that's been, created, that rift between you and your family members, you and your friend, you and your, like, community. So I think that this story is really intentionally made to talk about that very human side.
Yeah, and I certainly got a sense of that right away. And as a formerly incarcerated filmmaker, it's very important to me.
Mhm.
So I definitely got a sense of that right away. Plus, we were already friends from a
Yeah.
previous employment that we had.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like, all roads just sort of like brought us to each other
Mhm.
into this project. I don't feel like such things are an accident. So I feel like our collaboration is supposed to happen.
Absolutely.
And ever since we have jumped into it, I feel like magic is happening.
Yeah.
And so because it had that level of authenticity, I was very attracted to it, and just watching it go and grow from there has just it's been really inspiring for me. It's very important to me that we get this right.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And truly, like what you were saying before about us kind of meeting and you believing that everything is meant to happen, truly, like, I thought it was very kismet because when
mhm.
I was talking to my friend, we were both working on this show at the time. He's like, "My God, you have to talk to Artie." I was like, "Artie?" Like, sure. I mean, he's such a sweet individual. I'd love to hear his perspective on things. I didn't know at the time that you were a system affected person. And so to send this over to you and then to get such positive response, back about how authentic it felt to your experience and the experience of those who you've talked to and mentored for years now. It was an honor to hear that. And I don't know if you want to talk too much about what your experiences were like in comparison to the story, but I'm very happy that it from the beginning was something that you were attracted to and that we were able to develop it in a way where we could also touch on really important topics. Because having those sorts of concerns about things like ban the box, things like how difficult it is to get back on your feet, with having those 2 weeks and $200 and, like, without a family or any sort of, like, support structure upon reentry into society. It is so difficult to find anything, beyond worst case scenario, which is, homelessness or recidivism, which a lot of people also sometimes elect to do,
Yeah.
unfortunately, because the system is set up to encourage people to come back.
It's also hyper amplified that way. Like
Mhm.
in media, it's quite often portrayed that that is pretty much the only outcome for most people
Yeah.
are those things: houselessness, uh, reoffense, and then
Mhm.
they go back. It's a recidivism rate is very high in some people's minds, and so there's always this narrative that's being told around. Oh, crime rates are up, and people are just when they come home, they're still just as dangerous as they were. Here's the thing: if that's truly the case, that should be an indication to you that mass incarceration is not working.
Right.
So for me, it's about dispelling the myth around mass incarceration. It is a failed experiment,
Absolutely.
100% failed experiment. And so when I jumped into this script and I started to connect with Breyer and his story, I mean, it started right away with his first day of freedom. He opens the motel
Mhm.
room door, and I don't want to reveal too much, but
No,
he
go
opens
ahead.
the door, right? And he opens it to this space, and he's free. He's experiencing real freedom for the first time,
Yeah.
and he starts out very grateful. There's a gratitude there, right, that he
Mhm.
expresses. But I resonated very much with Breyer's sense of that and his desire to want to reintegrate correctly, whatever that may mean, right?
Yeah.
For him, it was, I just want to get on my feet. I've changed myself. I've transformed.
Yeah.
I want a new life. This
Mhm.
horrible thing happened. I do not want to be defined by it, but I want to behave in such a way that my remorse is on the surface of everything I do. And I
Absolutely.
1000% resonate with his experience in that.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to create a character that was very well-rounded, you know? I mean, one of the biggest parts of creating Briar and writing him, I wanted to touch on those very sensitive parts of his life, you
Mm,
know, of him trying to reconnect with a wife and a daughter who have kind of thrown him to the side and will
right.
refuse to give him the benefit of the doubt. But also, you know, with this, when they say like, "Oh, you know, give him a second chance," it's like leading up to that, he's had a second chance before a couple of times. But now coming out, you know, I think that this battle with sobriety that he's always faced and having that sort of remorse for the crimes that he's committed before, you know, he's really trying to do it by the book and trying to re-enter society in a way where he's setting himself up for success, not just for you know, societal expectations or whatever, but like to fit back in with his family and to kind of prove to himself that he's worthy of it because there's a sort of trauma that comes with the crimes, you know, whatever it may be in Breyer's case, you know, it was a drug possession, hit and run, manslaughter, you know, there is that sort of will to reprove yourself to those
Mm,
that, you know, care about you and that you care about, but there's a trauma that goes with those sorts of offenses, and then there's a subsequent trauma that comes with being incarcerated, you
right.
know? And the amount of sort of structure that is implemented in the prison systems, I mean, I'm sure you can speak to it much more than I could, but it's not some place that you leave and you're the exact same person as you went in as, you know?
No. I mean, the underlying through line throughout this entire script for me, it was the statement about you could be as ready as you want to be.
Mhm,
Like I can transform my life as an incarcerated person and I can come home willing to make amends, striving for redemption,
mhm.
right? And trying to live correctly. And when I say the word correctly, I use it in like law abiding,
Yeah,
right? Just trying to get back on my feet and live a normal life. But
that's not enough sometimes.
no, because what the through line here is that society in terms of the justice system, the so-called justice system that we have in
Mhm,
place right now is not designed for that. It's not
mm-mm,
designed for readiness. No matter how ready I was, I can come home and be as ready as I want to be, but society is not ready for me.
mhm.
Society has been conditioned to only see through a lens of bias, to
Yes.
only see through a lens of prejudice.
Mhm,
So no matter how ready I am, I'm just an ex-con to most people.
mhm.
And that's how Breyer feels. And that's what he encounters time and time again throughout this script.
Yeah.
And so I definitely related to that as well because it's very much a statement that redemption has to occur for society on a macro scale and not
Mhm.
just on a micro with Breyer and people like Breyer.
Yeah. Well, I think that's truly where the justice system has failed us in so many ways. When we look at people reentering society after having been incarcerated, it doesn't there's no there's no
Mhm.
connection from that sort of rehabilitative that sort of rehabilitative narrative that they say, oh yeah, like, we're gonna have people go to jail, they're gonna learn their lesson, they're gonna come back out. But what programs are in the jails?
Yeah,
Like what sort of resources are inside of those penitentiaries that are actually setting people up to find success on the other side? At the time that this story was taking place, which is in 1997, there were no job placement programs.
yeah,
You had to say whether or not, by law, you had ever committed a crime, and they do background checks. I mean, they only go back so many years, but if you've been in prison for less than that, they're gonna find out, and a lot of people will never even invite you in for an interview, you
yeah.
know? But then also on the other side, what are we doing to change the narrative to, allow employers to see that sort of change in that person, whatever that change is, but that sort of rehabilitation. There's no programs on the outside to inform the general public, you know what
Mhm.
I mean?
That's the perfect segue to this, which is in 1997, I was incarcerated in 1997. So,
Mhm,
for those who are listening to this for the first time, I am a script consultant and I am an associate producer on this film. I am a formerly incarcerated filmmaker, but I was also a juvenile who was tried as an adult. I was given a life sentence in the mid 90s, and I served 21 years of that life sentence in the California prison system, 8 of which were served in solitary confinement in a supermax facility in Northern California. So in 1997, I was definitely there. And I can tell you that in 1997, there was nothing available. There was maybe an NA class, maybe an AA,
mhm,
maybe some kind of 12-step program, right?
mhm,
Maybe. There was maybe a vocational class. One. There was definitely GED, like, they were definitely getting everybody through with their GED. There was very little college. There were no real there were not a lot of groups, and there were not a lot of vocational trades at that time. There was very little, and what most people did back then was they sat on their bunk, and they got worse, and they got deeper into organized crime or into
mhm.
whatever their thing was before they came in. They got deeper into it, and they sat on their bunk, and then one day they went home. But for the long-term guys like myself, who either had life or had, like, 500 years, no one was coming home back then.
Mm-mm.
So, anyone who had a life sentence or had, like, 50 years, they lived their lives that way. I'm not coming home, so I'm going to enjoy the prison experience.
And you have to find purpose
And
in
there was
some
very
way, shape,
little,
or
yeah.
form. And how do you find that,
Yeah,
when you're incarcerated?
yeah. So guys like Breyer, right? Because there were guys like Breyer.
Mhm,
He knew he was going home.
mhm,
He definitely knew that, but he already had the remorse and the guilt and the shame associated with what he had done. So guys like him, they tended to do very well because they went in with a purpose.
mhm.
I already feel guilt and remorse around what I've done, so I want to do something that actually changes the way I operate so that this never happens again, right?
Yeah.
And they did that not because of the system, they did it in spite of the system in
Yes.
place. In the current age, and that was the segue, was in modern times. We're in 2023, a lot has changed. There has been progress that has been made.
Mhm.
There are much more programs. Someone like myself who was 16 when I was, taken away, uh, and then 18 years old when I first entered the actual prison system, someone my age automatically now goes in and gets processed that way and gets overridden to lower custody yards.
Yeah.
So they have immediate access to programs and groups and whatnot. They don't automatically start at maximum security prisons the way I did.
Yeah.
So some things have shifted culturally and politically in the
Mhm.
landscape that allow for much more change. I have to give people that credit because it is in place and so many people have come home. Um, but it's still not enough, and
It's
we
still
haven't
not
done
enough,
enough. Yeah.
and you know what? You are such a huge prison reform advocate. I mean, you constantly go on these work trips to go and talk to district attorneys
Mhm.
and lawyers and people who are on the front end of that sort of prosecution, you know, to illuminate what it's like to be incarcerated and what happens after the gavel goes down. Because you just recently went out, to the East Coast to talk to some district attorneys about even more reform because, you know, we're making these incremental steps, but so much of it still has to be
Mhm.
accomplished. Because again, it's about changing the mindset of the people who haven't been inside, you know? It's very difficult to explain.
Yeah, we definitely haven't done enough, and that I feel is what this film also highlights,
Mhm.
is that some of the problems that Breyer was facing in 1997, we're still facing in 2023.
Yeah.
Now, we had banned the box, right? But when I came home in 2015, I had my very first job and I had to submit an application. I lied.
Mhm.
I straight up checked on the box. I've never been convicted of a felony. I had to, or I was not going to be employed.
So, you know, it's game over. As soon as
It
you check that
game over.
box, it's done.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just and I knew that they were only going to do a basic background check, which only goes as far back as 7 years.
Mhm.
And I knew that I had not been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years. So I was going to be okay. But if I was trying to get another job that was much more serious, where I'd have to actually go and live scan and like submit my fingerprint and all that good
Mhm.
stuff, I'm toast. And this happened in 2015. So we've made progress, but we still have a long way to go
Yeah.
before I feel like the sentiment of redemption catches up to the practice of it.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great way of putting it because I think that, you know, people talk the talk, but do
Right.
they walk the walk, you know? And it's something that was really important as I was writing this is I wanted to demonstrate who a good person was
Mm.
before talking about what they had done, you know. So as we go through different scenes and I won't go into too much of depth with this, but like, we see him give to charity, we see him be kind, and not in ways where it's getting brownie points with other people, you know? Like, we see him do it in private moments, you know,
Mhm.
and when it counts, he does it, you know, he
When no
gives
one's looking.
and that's what truly makes the
Right.
difference with this character is because you have to understand that there are human elements to everybody, but specifically in our story to previously incarcerated people,
Mhm.
and to give them the benefit of the doubt and to see these people as people and not just as pawns in this great American system, which I think so oftentimes they are. But to see him, you know, be gentle and be vulnerable and have those moments of insecurity and have those times where you see him walking on eggshells because he knows that he can't blow this one phone call or he can't blow an interview or he can't, you know, there's so many different things that are climactic moments getting out of prison and thinking
Mhm.
that freedom means one thing when you realize there are so many more hurdles ahead.
So many more hurdles, and depending on what when you went away, Breyer went away a little bit later, so he already had some life experience under his
Mhm.
belt when he went away. Um, Someone like myself, I did not. So the obstacles and hurdles I encountered, I had to learn how to drive.
Yeah.
Here I am. I'm like almost 40 years old, and I'm taking driving classes, and had never paid taxes. I had never. There was so much that I had never done, and they're not necessarily teaching you any of this in prison either.
No.
So you just come home. Here's your $200. Good luck to you,
Mhm.
and you have to figure it out. And that's very, very difficult to overcome for a lot of people. Anyone who's never even been incarcerated before can tell you just how difficult life can get out here.
Yeah.
So with the additional hurdles added, it's just compounded.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people do, and this is why we have a recidivism rate, is because a lot of people simply give up. They
Yep.
just I've seen it time and again. People just like, I'm trying very hard and I just can't get it going. It's just easier in there.
Mhm.
And how sad of a statement is that to make?
Yeah.
It's easier to be incarcerated and a part of the mass incarceration like beast in the belly of that beast than it is to be at home with your family trying to
Mhm.
make ends meet, you
Yeah.
know?
And to have that responsibility on top of that burden,
Right,
of being some sort of providing force for that family. I know a lot of people come back and they have problems getting jobs, obviously, but also, if you don't have a family, where are you gonna go?
right.
And if you don't have an address, how are you gonna get a job? And if you don't have a job, how are you gonna pay for a cell phone? If you don't have a cell phone, how are people gonna contact you?
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
just like one right after the next. It's like no wonder that people find it easier to be on the inside rather than on the outside because, to basically restart, your life at an age where people are no longer willing to give you that benefit of the doubt of like, "Ah, he's just 19 and broke," you
right,
know?
exactly,
It's
yeah,
totally different to
yeah,
be further along and to have that sort of maturity where people would assume like, "Yeah, sure, like, they probably would have it together by this point," but to not and then to be faced with that sort of judgment that society has, it is close to impossible
yeah,
sometimes.
and for him, it's worse. He's this is 1997.
Mhm,
I can't think I can no, I can. I can think of maybe 1 or 2 total nonprofits that existed in the space in 1997
mhm,
that were geared towards reentry,
yeah,
right? So a guy like Breyer is coming home to absolutely nothing.
mhm,
And that's how it used to be. I mean, he's starting out in a motel.
mhm,
That says it all right there, right? And in 2023, thankfully, we have so many nonprofits that are in the reentry space. Obviously, I work with a lot of
yeah,
them. And so that's one of my passions and one of the areas that I'm really, really, really into is catching the men and women who come home and then helping to mentor them and guide them into reentry and into freedom. And
absolutely.
I'm talking about full wraparound. Like you need housing, you need
Mhm,
employment, and what a lot of people overlook, you need mental health addressment. Like you need to be addressing someone's mental health along the way,
mhm,
coping skills, just talking about like how difficult it is, someone to cry with, someone to vent to,
yeah.
right? You need these outlets because society, the difficulty of it just attacks you as soon as you come home.
It's like
So
it's like going into shock. I mean, talk about your
absolutely,
your first day, you know? I
man.
mean, hearing about that if you wanna talk about it a little bit, but it's just like you don't realize just how much things can change, but also you and the way that you deal with those sorts
Mhm.
of things. It would be incredibly beneficial to have those sorts of structures outside of prison form that mental health, and to help previously incarcerated people soften that transition of going from such rigid, structured life inside of prison to, you know, absolutely nothing on the
Right.
outside where it's just you're thrown into the wind. I watched this one documentary and he's just like there's this one person who had been incarcerated and he's just like, a lot of times why people go back is also, it's like letting a dog off the leash. They don't know what to do. They don't know which way to go. You don't know how to, behave and sometimes I think that can be really problematic as well because there's nothing that really sets you up for that expectation, that sort of shock, that cold water that you're jumping into feet first. And all of a sudden it's just like, okay, well, how do I survive out here with everything having changed? You're away for 21
Right.
years. And it's not just things as simple as like, oh, look, the phones have changed. It's things as simple as like that brand name has changed and
Right.
or like when you talk about like automatic water sensors and stuff. If you want to go into that, I'm sure you'd have a way better explanation than I would.
My first day was crazy like that for sure. It really is. Here's the thing: the system itself, the justice system itself, is punitive,
Mhm.
and that means it's punishment based.
Mhm.
So that means it's trauma generating,
Yes.
right? So no matter how much trauma you had before you ever went in, you go in and the trauma continues in one
Yeah.
way or another.
It just
and
deepens.
it lives inside of your body. And the thing is that no matter how much rehabilitation one has, there is no plan for that. And the system is not designed to address that before you come home, which leads me to my first day
Mhm.
because I didn't even plan for that. I had absolutely no idea that I was going to be hit in the face with PTSD on my first day. And
Absolutely.
I had no idea that my first 2 weeks to 2 months were going to be nightmarish for me
Mhm.
because the very first day, as soon as I went into a it was one of those markets at a gas station.
Mhm.
We walked in. I said, I have to go use the bathroom. I go to use the bathroom and I walk up to the sink to wash my hands and I don't see any levers. I don't
Mhm.
see any knobs. I don't see any way of I don't know how to turn the water on. So I'm just staring at the sink and someone walks by me and kind of gives me like that, "You all right, bro? Like you got to put your hand under it, man. Like wave." So I did, but him helping me, it just freaked me out more because it made me very self-conscious.
Yeah.
Uh,
In a way, I'm sure it's, like, humiliating not to
like
be able
something's
to
wrong with me.
function
Yeah. And
on a
and
basic level, like washing your hands,
yeah,
being
it
able to use
was
the
very
bathroom by
triggering.
yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was like it was shocking like that. It was
Yeah.
triggering like to the point where I walked outside and then it hit me. I have to get out of this place. Cuz as soon as I walked out of that bathroom
Mm.
and I'm standing in the inside the market area of it, I start noticing all the chips, all the cookies, all the choices, and I was completely overwhelmed.
Mhm.
I have to get out of here. I was gonna cry. I was gonna have a meltdown right there, like just literally shut down.
Yeah.
It felt like a panic attack was coming. So they get me in the car, they get me down to Los Angeles, and I start to realize over the next couple of weeks, I am terrified of everything. The sights, the sounds, old people, kids,
Mhm.
traffic is terrifying to me.
'Cause you haven't seen those things in 21
No,
years.
I didn't understand just how much my body was carrying
Yeah.
from the 21 years of experience of everything you can possibly think of, and
Mhm.
also the things that I had seen or that I had done in my past life, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these things were so jarring to me, and I just wanted to stay in this program I was at. I didn't want to go outside. It took me a month to get on the bus. I was scared to even walk across the street and go into the market across the street to get
Mhm.
myself a bag of chips until finally a friend of mine who was staying at the same program after like a month he came up to my room and he's like, dude, you need to get out of this room and we're going to get on the bus
Mhm.
and I'm going to take you somewhere.
Mhm.
And he like forced me, right? From that moment I started to acclimate.
Yeah.
And then of course, everything went from there. I'm doing fine now, but
Mhm.
I did not plan for that, and the system is not designed for that as well.
Well, how do
So
you anticipate it? You can't
y-
plan for
you
something that you
can't.
don't realize is
Yeah.
about to slap you in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we take someone like Briar, imagine his
Mhm.
experience. Imagine the experience I just told you about. Briar comes home and he wants to have family reunification.
Mhm.
So he's trying to reconnect with his daughter and she's slamming the phone on his face.
Mhm.
She's like hanging up on him. Imagine how that makes him feel, how isolated and alone. Now, here's the catch though with society is that we can have these experiences. I could have suffer all the trauma in the world
Mhm.
and have the boohoo poor me story all I want. Most of society will look at it as that's just an excuse for the behaviors.
Yeah.
There there's a very there's a very cultural lack of empathy in our society.
Mhm.
And what I am hoping that this film does is to generate that empathy more than anything in the world. I just want someone to watch this film and to imagine themselves in this guy's shoes
Mhm.
for a minute. It doesn't even have to be you. Imagine it's your son, your daughter, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle. Imagine it's someone you love the most in his shoes
Mhm.
no matter what this person has done,
Mhm.
right? We are not the worst thing we've ever done. But if you can imagine yourself in someone's shoes just for a little bit,
Yeah.
it might be enough, just enough to shift perception on some level. And I feel like this film is going to accomplish that. There is another aspect of this script that really speaks to me, the story itself. And because it makes it's the biggest statement that I really wish I could just shout to the heavens every day of my life So the people who were harmed in this particular situation,
Mhm.
the surviving family members, law enforcement,
Mhm.
right? And they want Breyer, right? Because again, our only understanding of justice is revenge. It's
Yep.
punitive. It's
Mhm.
vengeance, right? We've been conditioned that way
Trained since the crib.
since the crib, and these guys are no different.
Mhm.
And granted, if we use empathy, I can understand that. I
Mhm.
can understand he would feel that way about Breyer and want to harm him. I
Mhm.
totally get it. I can only imagine if somebody harmed someone I loved, how the emotional aspect of how I would feel would be.
Yeah.
I totally get that. What I would actually do about that, that's where the choice is
Yeah.
of the kind of person I want to be, right? But I can understand the emotionality behind it. But the statement that really, when I was reading this, it is that both he and Breyer want healing.
Mhm.
So many people were harmed in this process, and they both just want to heal. And we have been conditioned in our society to believe that we are either victim or offender.
Mhm.
We're on two sides of the fence,
Yeah.
and that's a lie.
Yeah.
It's the great lie. The truth is that we all want the same thing. We may have different approaches, but we are actually on the same side of the fence.
Yeah.
We all deserve healing. All of us. This it's collective. But we've lied to ourselves for so long that we actually believe that we are in opposition.
Mhm.
And it just guides both of their steps.
Yeah.
But what I'm speaking about is the vengeful part
Mhm.
of
Dean.
Dean wanting to harm Breyer,
Yeah.
right? Because he has bought into the lie, and the emotional aspect of it only feeds it. It's like fuel to the fire,
Mhm.
right? So as I'm reading this, I'm like, no, Dean, like you both want the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? This tragic thing happened. I understand that, but you both want the same thing. But we are so blinded by our own conditioning. We're so blind that we can't even imagine another form of justice,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and also Dean being a cop, you know, I mean, I can only imagine for him what he faces on a
Hmm.
day-to-day basis, you know, looking at his story, having his wife and his kid taken away from him
Yeah.
by Breyer, you know, he probably sees things in a very black and white way, you know, either you follow the law or you break it. And in his case, you know, he looks at this one person who took so much from him and so much from the people that he loves. You know, Breyer took the life away from so many more people than the victims that he hit, you know. And so to look from Dean's perspective, you can almost empathize with him a little bit, but you have to understand that like he's driven almost to it by the way that he's been conditioned with his job and by society, you know, but it's not the right way, you know, to take justice into your own hands. It's not kind. It's not
No,
it's not moral.
no. But I love the way that you have spotlighted in this movie. You have spotlighted the relationship between victim and offender as it
Mhm.
really authentically is right now,
Yeah.
because that's genuinely how it is. And so, just to, as an example or even proof of
Mhm.
what I'm saying, I would not be sitting here right now talking to you if it was not for all of the victims who used to come into prison and survivors of crime, and they would come into prison and we would participate in like victim awareness groups or victim
Mhm.
impact groups, and they would come in and they would tell us what happened to them,
Yeah.
and their stories broke us, like broke us. I'm talking a full room of men tattooed up, crying our eyes out
Yeah.
because of what had happened to these people, right? What that did for us, it really made us have an internal decision, which was, I never want to do anything like that to anybody, and I don't want anyone else to ever go through that either. And I used to
Yeah.
ask them, what do you really want? Like, has anybody ever asked you what you want? And they would say, no, not really, because as soon as the gavel drops,
Mhm.
you guys go away with your life sentences or whatever, and no one ever contacts us again. But I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you right now, you sitting here, rotting away in a cell, it doesn't do anything for me or my family.
It doesn't bring anybody back. It doesn't
Nothing.
undo what's already happened.
No. So what are you gonna do, actively do,
Mhm.
to make sure nothing like this ever happens again? That's what you can do for me.
Yeah.
That was so powerful. It's the only reason I'm here right now.
Mhm.
Because after that, it guided every decision I ever made from that point forward, which not we're looking at my freedom, but it's beyond that. It's like I didn't just gain freedom, I gained purpose.
Mhm.
And it was because of my relationship with survivors of crime and victims of crime. We're on the same side.
Yeah.
We're the same people. We've just forgotten or been conditioned out of that.
And taking the time to understand every side of the situation, you know? I think so often people pick their side, they stick to it, and the horse blinders go on, and they don't
Mhm.
take the time or put in the effort to find that empathy, to, talk to people who have offended before,
Right.
or to try and find the best part of a bad situation, which sometimes the only thing you can do is just educate people, you know?
Absolutely.
There is a very small part in this film, that I think really speaks a lot more to that sort of societal impact that we see with Breyer and everybody else who's just offended by the mere presence of Breyer. But we have this little girl
Mhm.
who doesn't see anything wrong with Breyer. When he finds a doll and says, "Hey, is this yours?" She kind of smiles and waves, and
Yeah.
it's the mom
Yeah.
that enforces that sort of hate and that judgment and saying, "Don't talk to that man."
Right.
And it's the same thing later on. We see that little girl again, and she's playing hopscotch, and Briar looks over and waves, and she smiles back. And I think that I saw this really interesting video the other day where the stranger brings two kids together who are different, either in race or physical ability or in mental capacities,
Mhm.
and says, "What's the difference between you guys?" And they look at each other, and one of them, I forget exactly what all of the different answers were, but they would have answers as simple as like, "Well, I used to like lemon flavored things, but I don't like lemon flavored things anymore, but Jesse does." And that would be the one difference between two kids of different races, different genders,
Right.
if they were in a wheelchair or if one had Down syndrome, those were the simple things, and I think that
Right.
that it's just proof as to how much society has conditioned us to see things as a you're right or you're wrong. And it's like either you're on my side or you're on the wrong side,
Right.
you know?
It's very true. It also makes me think like no one arrives to the point of being capable of committing crime in the first place by being born that way.
No.
At
Nobody's
least v
nobody's born
at
inherently
least
evil.
extremely rarely would someone be born with a mental condition that would, uh, sort of make them have like a, predisposition towards violence or harm in some way, right?
Yeah.
That is an anomaly.
Very, very rarely.
It's
And a lot of
extremely
times though too, if you were to receive that sort of mental care at a young age, those sorts of violent tendencies or predispositions to whatever, we're talking about, it can be avoided
right.
if it's treated early and properly. But again, just to go back to that point, it's like nobody is inherently evil.
No.
Nobody is born into the world thinking, "Oh, okay, like I'm gonna be in a gang someday," or
Yeah.
or thinking like, "You know what? It's fine if I rob a convenience store or something." It's
Right.
kind of like the whole you have to justify it in some way, and that sort of brainwashing that I think sometimes happens
Right.
within those close communities, whether it's in a gang or whether it's in police enforcement and whatever, whatever group you're a part of, you assimilate.
And it starts at home.
Yes.
And it really does. And to say that is not to excuse later behavior.
Mhm.
It's simply fact. It starts at home, and that's sort of the call to action, though.
Mhm.
That's where we should be starting. So it's not just it's not just rehabilitation inside of a facility, which means it's already
It's
too late. It's
preventative.
happened. Yeah. And when we think preventative, it's also not just me, which I do, going and speaking to juveniles who are probably already in facilities and they're not going to prison yet, but they're already having contact with law enforcement and they're already sort of in that school to prison pipeline. It's before that, before they even enter school to prison pipeline. It really starts at home.
Mhm,
And one thing society does not like, it does not like people pointing out the fact that we are all on some level accountable and responsible,
mhm.
especially responsible for the condition our society is in.
Yeah. People place it on the individual so often. They're like, "Well,
Yeah,
you committed a crime, therefore you are solely responsible
solely.
for everything that happens after
Right.
this," you know?
Yeah.
Like, you have to take into account, like, what brought a person to this point in their life where they thought that this would be the best thing
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
or a last resort. So often people do and commit crimes out of necessity, you know? If you can't feed your family, if you can't feed yourself, if you can't take care of those that you love, you're going to be driven to that sort of desperate condition.
Sure.
And those sorts of things are things that are preventable if we address it in
Yeah.
the correct ways.
People don't like what that would entail, but
No.
it is highly socioeconomic. And I have a friend. He's a police officer. And one time I told him that I said, I don't actually have to imagine a world where I live in a safe neighborhood and I'm not getting like beaten up by cops or I'm not being
Mhm.
run off by gangs or robbed or I I don't have to imagine that. Those areas already exist. They exist
Mhm.
right here in LA. And I can
Yeah.
go to any of those areas right now. And the only difference between those areas and the other areas where it happens are mostly socioeconomic.
Yes.
So it's not like I have to like reimagine the wheel here. It's simply about equity and equal distribution,
Mhm.
which again, I say to say that people don't really like being called on that because no one wants to be a part of the macro solution,
Yes.
because that means they're macro responsible.
I mean, it is kind of like that when you have a whole bunch of people that all have a responsibility for one great thing,
Mm,
no one will. It's like when they say if there's ever an emergency and you see like a car crash or something, you have to point at one person and say you call 911. You find a doctor. Like you have to assign specific tasks to people because if you have a big group, no one's going to step up and take on that responsibility because of exactly what you're saying, that sort of macro, what was the word that you used?
macro solution
Yeah,
versus macro responsibility,
that sort of
Yeah,
macro responsibility,
right.
no one's willing to take that on because they see it as such a huge thing that they've contributed so little to do.
Yeah,
But when everybody has the same pattern of behavior, that's when you have that sort of overwhelming cultural responsibility and those sorts of problems. I
yeah,
mean, let's talk about how economically imbalanced the US is. Let's talk about how privatized systems have encouraged this sort of behavior and how, unless we address it and make very intentional moves as an individual, like nothing's going to change.
no.
We all have to be accountable.
And this is the world that Breyer is
Yes.
coming home to
Yes.
in 1997, which again had much less than even what we have today, which is still
Yeah.
not enough. So,
Well, and looking at Breyer and the world that he's coming home to, part of the reason why this story is so interesting is because we don't really have a bad guy. It's called the bad guy
mhm,
because according to stigmas and his past, Breyer is a bad person.
yeah,
Sure, we can say that with air quotes. But when we look at Dean,
yeah,
who in our world looking from the outside in is the good guy, is the enforcer,
yeah,
he brings law and justice and control to society. He is our antagonist. He's the one who is perpetuating this sort of hate. He's the one that is encouraging this sort of mental health crisis for people who are reentering. So often you see people imposing that sort of judgment and imposing that sort of hate. We see things with the mother saying, "Don't talk to that man," or the purse lady who turns around and fears that she's being robbed, even though she's just been saved from being hit by a car.
Right.
Things as simple as that, and then seeing it on a bigger scale with Dean and that sort of hate that he brings, we look at that and we say, okay, well, no one person is necessarily a bad person, but it is in those small moments that we need to be very intentional about the way that we treat others, whether it's race based, whether it's with the stigmas of someone being previously incarcerated, whether it's just an inconvenience. We have to have empathy for the people that we jump to conclusions for.
Yeah. I would just to hammer the nail in here, I would just say that one thing that the reason why we're taking district attorneys into the prisons is because we want them to see and realize that when they are prosecuting someone and they're in the courtroom with this person and this person is in cuffs and they're in a jumpsuit
Mhm,
and they may have committed terrible crimes, right?
mhm,
Every version of every person that they prosecute and the person they see in that courtroom is always the worst version of that person
absolutely.
in that moment. But when you take them inside and you introduce them to someone who's 10, 15, 20 years down the road,
Mhm,
they're blown away by the capacity for change. And it's not that it's going to cause them to not prosecute people, but it will be something that they'll have in the back of their minds when they are doing it. Like, I know I'm running into the worst version of this person right now, but I know what they can be.
yeah,
So, and that's also not to say that, the system that is in place right now is the system we have. If there were another system available that was entirely prisonless, I would be all for it.
mhm,
I don't know that that exists yet or that the concept is fully, uh, fleshed out enough to have another experiment,
mhm,
but I know that's the goal for sure. But in the meantime, we do have the system that we have in place. So my work is how do I make that uh how do I instill more humanity into the building blocks of
mhm,
the system that's already in place,
and that's what
especially something that's already been built off of such, a lust for revenge or is punitive in nature.
yeah,
How do I add heart to that?
transparency in
Some would
education.
say I can't, but you know what? I'm gonna die trying.
Yeah,
That's my
absolutely.
that's my purpose and that's my passion. So,
I mean, and also, like, let's talk about the parole systems.
hmm
Because with parole systems of modern day and of when Breyer came out into the society and reentered, it's not set up to allow someone to reintegrate without a lot of different struggles. I mean, we've already kind of talked about it, but when we talk about recidivism, 2 times as many people who go back to jail don't reoffend. They go back on technical violations. So how many times do you see somebody who misses a meeting or something is documented wrong and now they have to go back for
hmm
something as simple as putting something on their schedule the wrong day or at the
yeah,
wrong time, or maybe they had to go out of town and their parole officer forgot to write it down and document it, and now they're back in jail. This is an actual story. Went back for 90 days, this guy did, because his parole officer forgot to write something down and put it into the records. And then
yeah,
they had to go through that waiting process of saying, like, well, you went outside of where you were allowed to go. So now you have to go back. And that's just
happens all the
creating
time.
even
Yeah,
more trauma for those
yeah,
people and even more hate for that system. It doesn't encourage people to act in a way where we say, okay, like, you are a good a contributor to society. It only encourages people to fear that
mm,
system that has been in place.
yeah.
I don't think that it's helping people to see it in a way where it's encouraging, but just to fear.
So, for anyone who's listening to this, just to put this out there, it's just information. But in California, the recidivism rate for someone who is a non-lifer, non-long term,
Mhm.
someone who's got 2 years, who did 5 years,
Mhm.
7 years, right? It is around 70 to 75% within the first 3 years
Yes.
that someone will recidivate. For someone who had a life sentence, like myself,
Mhm.
or is a long term person who came home, the recidivism rate in the first 3 years is less than 3%. Three, probably less.
That's wild.
There's
But
a,
it makes
there's
sense.
reasons for that,
Yeah.
but what I'm going to highlight here is that the reason why the recidivism rate is so high for these other people is based on technical violations.
Yeah.
They have
If you look at 75% of people,
yeah,
recidivating within the first 3 years, that means that 50% go back on technical violations.
yeah.
Is that not the most wild thing you've heard?
It's
It's
completely wild.
it's infuriating,
Yeah.
truly,
Yeah.
because it's simple things that, these people who have rehabilitated at this point, who have gotten out, who are trying, you make one mistake, you go
Yeah.
back. And how many of us can say that we've never made a mistake before? None of us.
Yeah, and we're not talking about new crimes.
Right,
We're not talking
exactly.
about somebody reoffending in a new way. We're talking about a technical violation.
Yeah.
It got to a point where
You wanna explain what a technical violation is?
that's like a dirty bottle.
Yep.
Uh, you were supposed to be wearing an ankle monitor. I've seen this happen before many times. You're on an ankle monitor, and you're out with your family, and it fucking runs out of battery.
Mhm.
There's nothing you can do. And as soon as it runs out of battery and you're not to them, you may as well have taken it off.
Yep.
So it's an absconding. It to them in their minds you've run. You're on the run.
Yeah.
So you get technically violated just for that. And I've seen people go back for that. Like their battery ran out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, we're all responsible for our batteries, right? But
Sure, I mean, we
sometimes the
have to be
phone goes dead on us, man. Like sometimes it's just life. Like,
the air is human, and
right.
and it's not like these are violent offenses, these aren't even illegal offenses, it's just, well, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, it's one small mistake.
To send someone back to prison because the battery ran out on their fucking ankle monitor blows my mind.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time.
Mhm.
And I was on parole for 5 years as an ex-lifer, right?
Mhm.
And this is how ridiculous parole is. I was on parole for 5 years. By the second year, my PO was like, "Man, I wish I could just let you off.
Mhm.
It's ridiculous that I still have to deal with you. Like, you should have done a year, 6 months. It's ridiculous. All 5 years, I have to come out here and I have to test you. I had to pee in a cup, right?
Mhm.
Almost monthly.
Mhm.
And at a certain point, he would just like hand me the bottle and be like, Even if you don't pee, I don't care. I'm tired of driving out here. Like, I really wish it's not individualized.
No,
You
of
see, the
course.
system is just a broad stroke. It's everyone's in the same bucket, and it's not individualized at all. If someone on the other side, a part of the 75, who's on a technical violation for a dirty bottle, it's not throwing them in prison that's needed. If it was individualized, it'd be like this person needs a program
Right.
because a lot of people who start using, it's because they run into the obstacles they face while on parole and they start self-medicating. This
Right.
happens all the time. The you
But
know the I told you about the 2% of lifers under 3%, right?
right, right.
Of that population, let's say 1 to 3% of lifers or long-term guys who've gone back to prison. None of them were for violent crimes.
Mhm.
They were all for self-medicating. Pretty much all of it was self-medicating because they couldn't deal with the outside world, and their PO just got tired of giving them chance after chance and then sent them back.
Yeah.
And now they have to go to the board every single year to try to get their freedom back again. And that is the fucking reality we live in right now.
Right. Well, and if we were given those sorts of resources, if people that were inside of the prisons were given those resources and learning how to cope and having mental health care inside before they were released,
Yeah.
some of those could have been avoided. But without having that sort of education on, okay, how do I address this in a healthy way that doesn't involve me using, I feel like we could avoid so much.
So let me ask you specifically about the producers and the creative heads who are attached to this
Mhm.
project. Like, can you say who's attached or
Sure.
how we got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was fortunate enough to work on several shows with you. But then on some of the other shows, I was able to talk to some of the producers, directors. So we have a couple of amazing professionals that are attached to this. Greg Tanis, who was producer and director of House of the Dragon and House, and is on another big show at the moment. I'm so humbled to
It's
have him be a
incredible.
part of it.
Yeah.
Michael Goy, he served 2 terms as the ASC president, and he's a huge producer, director, and cinematographer in the industry. He just finished Rookie Feds and the new Avatar: Last Airbender, Netflix's biggest show, so he's also a part of it. You're a part of this. You're an associate producer,
Yep.
and you work on some huge, amazing shows too in the locations department.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, we also have some amazing producers who are doing a lot more of the logistical stuff. We have Anthony DeMaria, Sam Shapiro, Lava Hunt, and then we have CNS Chaotic Neutral Studios who
Mhm.
are handling all of the distribution and marketing. I'm so happy to have everybody on board. Um, Everybody's really passionate
Yeah.
about spreading the word,
And they
prison
believe in
reform,
you,
and
our
yeah.
director. Like they believe in you. It's a great script, and they should. Uh, I really think this is going to be shot very well. I think it's going to translate well. I think it's going to be impactful.
Yeah.
I'm so stoked to get this going. So when do we start filming this thing?
We start filming this thing on May 17th. We're going to be doing it in 2 different blocks. We're still fundraising for some of it. We have about 65K that's been raised so far. We're looking for about 15 to 20 more. And those sorts of funds would go toward paying our crew, paying for locations, all of these things. They all pile up. But we have a lot of people that are also donating their time, believe me. I've called in as many favors as I can for this.
This is how we do it.
This is
Yep.
how we do it. This is how it's made, you
People
know?
don't know understand. Movie magic is like friendship favors all day long. So
Every day, it's Favor Nation,
but
yeah.
if someone listens to this and it really it like touches their spirit and they're
Mhm.
like, I really want to invest in this. I want to be a part of this process. I believe in what they're up to, what they're doing.
Yep.
How would someone go about donating or in other ways contributing to this project?
Absolutely. So we have a website, and it's really simple. It's called thebadguyshort.com. If you were to go to that website, you can learn all about our project. You can learn about the team. You can look at different press releases that we're going to get up, and cast members, as well as there's a donation page. So on the donation page, we have a link to a We Did It page. We're physically sponsored by From the Heart Productions, which means that donations are tax deductible for next year. And that has really helped us a lot as well because people like to donate. People like to give to charity, and
Yep.
it helps you, it helps us, and it helps a good cause. So please do.
Yeah, please give. Like, click all the links. Whatever, everything she just said right now, just go click every button.
And
Definitely donate.
yeah.
Definitely ask how you can help or support.
And if you'd like to also support us in other ways, please feel free to follow us on social medias. We're on all of them at The Bad Guy Short. And if you would like to follow along, we talk about things beyond just the themes of this and the intent that we have, but also like, mood and how we're going to shoot it and some
Right.
of our locations. And I know like when I was preparing for this, I had this 70-page long lookbook. So everything is
It
in
looks
great detail.
phenomenal. Yeah,
Thank you.
it
Took
really
me a
does.
long time to make it. I was like, all right, how do I do this? I first went to Greg and I showed him my first attempt. He's just like, no, 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 no. And he showed me one for the show that he had show run before. And I was like, oh my God. I am peanuts compared to this. And so I came back to him a little while after that with everything, and I'm just like, this is how we're gonna shoot it. This is how it's gonna be colorized. But then we also talk about the world
Yeah.
as well, you know. So it's like all of the technical aspects, including the world that we're in. You know,
Mhm.
1997 Los Angeles was not necessarily a peaceful place.
Right.
As people who have been there, seen that, have would definitely know. But yeah, please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever, you name it. And we would greatly appreciate any and all awareness, any and all donations, $5, $10, $100. It all helps to go toward raising awareness about some very important topics.